Cette conférence va maintenant être enregistrée.
Yes, we always say that in French. So, welcome to this call. Bienvenidos. Our colleagues in Mexico are actually conducting simultaneous translation on a separate call today. So we're very happy to have them with us. And this could be the start, if this works, of having multilingual calls every month. I'm going to go through a brief overview of where we are in the movement. We'll hear a special presentation from our newest member of this movement, Accountability Counsel, who has been working on very relevant issues for some time. We'll have an update on our work on COVID-19 adaptation, on our research, on the global partnership. Hi, whoever just joined, please mute yourself until it's time for you to talk. Thank you. So we'll have an update on the research on our emerging partnership with the Global Partnership for Social Accountability. We'll strategize together how to further raise our voice. This is a unique moment in history, and we can work together to really raise this issue of investing in empowering communities, of localizing the SDGs with many more policymakers than we've done to date. We'll hear updates from our chapters in their progress at the country level around the world. And I'll remind everyone that our next meeting is at the same time, 1 month from today, Wednesday, on July 29th. So this movement was launched, Sustainable Development Goals, in 2015. And many of us had lobbied for people-centered, community-centered issues to be part of what the UN was calling the world we want. And now in COVID-19 time, we are discovering that the world that we want, that empowers communities, is actually the world that we need. And there has been a lot of emphasis on this point right now, that this is a historic moment. The famous writer Arundhati Roy in the Financial Times wrote that the pandemic is a portal, that nothing could be worse than a return to normality. Everybody is talking about, oh, we got to get back to normality. That normality was not good for a lot of people. So she wrote, historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. This one is no different. It's a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. So the world that we need, the world that we want, starts with her, with the people living in just abject poverty, struggling to support their families on marginal lands, with tools that have not improved in 1,000 years, with no access to public services or to having their voice matter in their society. This is a profound injustice that this movement is committed to changing. That injustice is a long time coming. People have been working to build the kind of responsive local institutions where her voice can be heard and make a difference for her and her family and her community and her world for more than 100 years. However, it is gaining momentum, and we in this movement are committed to accelerating it. One thing that's true about women's lives in particular is that they need progress on very multiple sectors at the same time. You know, we published an article once called "Silos Are Sexist." And the great frustration for people in the movement is that there are little pockets of money for a health project or a water project. But for that big blue project of building the local institutions and good local governance, that sector didn't even have a name until 2012, when some papers came out calling it community-led development. And so we seized on that literature. We chose to all work under that umbrella and to demand that people see that development is local. It happens in communities. Our goals are to ensure voice and agency for women, youth, marginalized groups, to ensure that a fair share of public resources, at least 20%, is at the community level, to ensure that there is good local governance. And by that we mean that there's social accountability, that there's transparency, that there's responsiveness, that there's direct citizen engagement, that there are quality public services, and resilience. And resilience is now a key window that we can push on to get governments to recognize the vital role of community leadership in achieving resilience. Globally, we now have 70 members who are organizations that work in multiple countries and are also supporting the setup of national chapters. We have this very elegant theory of change where the movement is developing a shared agenda. We're working to advocate for national engagement and mobilization to push the agenda of decentralization and devolution. And we're also trying to facilitate or trying to build partners of organizations to facilitate this at scale and achieve healthy, productive, resilient, self-reliant communities. So we hope that those two thrusts come together and build the capacity for this to happen at national scale, and that there really become country-owned programs of community-led development that can achieve the 2030 goals. Our regional coordinators hopefully are all on the line. We're also partnering with groups in Mexico and Venezuela, and we hope to get that organized regionally and supported regionally, and with a network called Login in Southeast Asia. Last month marked a milestone with UNICEF sharing their minimum quality standards for indicators for community engagement. Community engagement finally is becoming recognized as a vital component in the health sector. And that being the biggest sector in international development is a big milestone. We're also seeing lots of publications, and this one is what led to today's session. Samer wrote this article for the Stanford Social Innovation Review on how communities are rallying to deal with the coronavirus crisis, and he is on our call today. And also, just a few weeks later, The New Yorker, a very influential magazine in this country, published a major article on the same topic. So some of the big influencers are starting to see that this pandemic is indeed a portal to hopefully a world that puts people at the center of development and communities at the center of development. So with that, I will stop sharing and I will hand it over to our colleagues from Accountability Council. So
great. Can you hear me okay?
We hear you okay.
Great.
And Samer, can you, are you able to share the screen with Natalie's slides, or shall I?
We're doing a joint project here. Good morning, everybody, and good afternoon for people in different time zones all over the world. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here with you. I'm Natalie Bridgman Fields. I'm the founder and director of Accountability Council, and I'm joined by Samer Arabi, who's our research director, and Margot Day, our policy director, is on the line, and I believe we have some policy fellows here, as well as our associate Madigan Griffin, who's on the phone too. So I wanted to first just give an overview of why I'm so delighted that we have joined the Movement for Community-Led Development, as that is really the heart of our work. I'm going to just contextualize our work briefly about the three approaches, the three ways into this problem that Accountability Council works with, and then pass it over to Samer to do a demo of one of our key tools which I hope you will all be super users of at the end here. And so given limited time, I'm just going to dive right in here. First, I wanted to note what's obvious for all of you, which is that often international financial flows can cause a lot of harm. And I'm talking about the dams, mines, pipelines, but also the projects that are intended to do good or cause a development outcome that's positive. Without that key piece of community consultation, and importantly, we believe being community-led, we often see whether the project's aimed at a positive benefit or is very understood to have negative consequences for local people. Though those local consequences can be dire in terms of, the land grabs that cause multi-generational impacts on poverty, in terms of the sexual abuse impacts on women and girls from outsiders coming into a community to build a big infrastructure project, to the environmental devastation that can come from these projects and the host of other types of abuse that you all are familiar with. As again, the vulnerable are the groups who pay the highest price and are the least consulted in the projects that we come across at Accountability Council. COVID-19 has obviously made that risk to vulnerable people even more acute. We're seeing that the not just risk of land grabs, but actual land grabs increase just in the small sample size of our own work. And of course, the public health implications of this are dire for people who don't have a margin to work with their public health to begin with. So moving on, Samar, the context of our work is that we focus on international financial flows because they have, in an increasing degree, the ability of communities to speak up and speak out against the abuses that they're experiencing and communicate directly with the decision makers at international institutions who are deciding to finance these projects causing harm. So what are they? They're called accountability offices. Some of you may be very, very familiar with them, some may not. But our work is solely focused on making sure these accountability offices are independent, fair, transparent, and effective fora for people to raise their voice with a grievance to a project financer and get redress and remedy. This system as a whole has only existed since the mid-90s. We are still seeing the creation of accountability offices on a regular basis. It is a work in progress. We also have seen really dramatic victories and outcomes out of this set of accountability offices for any individual community. However, the average experience is not a good one. We see that far too few cases are going through an accountability office process leading to a just result. So our work has three approaches in order to address that. First, we have a communities program with lawyers dedicated to being responsive to community requests. That program is staffed with lawyers in San Francisco, Asia, and Africa, with the idea that these are the people who can support communities to understand how an accountability office works and to support people through that process, whether they need a lot of support or very little support. So we have a very needs-based response to supporting these communities that we work with. Also, it's really important for us to note that we bring what we call a respect-based approach to that work, which is a focus on women, vulnerable groups, and often all the systems of domination and hierarchy that exist even within vulnerable communities, so that we're not perpetuating the same types of harm and abuse that led to issues in the first place. Through that work, we've worked in about 50 countries in the past decade, and I want to give you a quick case study of what one of these accountability office cases looks like to give you just a snapshot in time, and maybe Samar can pick up on this case in his remarks too, as he's been very intimately involved in it. After the earthquake in Haiti, as many of you know, there were a number of types of international financial flows centering on Haiti. One of them was the Inter-American Development Bank and USAID together doing a project with the government of Haiti to take the land of 4,000 people almost overnight and turning it into an area for a sweatshop as a way to diversify the economy, which was seen as disaster aid or responsiveness. What it did instead is a land grab that totally devastated the lives of these 400 farmers and their families, again, almost 4,000 people, creating all the predictable types of harm that you can imagine. So people who are sustainable farmers, feeding themselves, their families, sending their kids to school, and feeding their neighboring communities, are now people eating one meal of rice a day, if that. All the girl children were taken out of school first. The educational impacts, the social impacts have become quite dire. And of course, where land is life and land is your security and it's gone overnight, this community's really been devastated. So they are a really inspiring model of people who have not given up. For a decade, they launched a campaign to get justice in the face of this atrocity. We have the fortune of working with ARRED and ActionAid Haiti on this case, which is a typical way that we work in cases in partnership with people's existing advocates and social movements at a local level. And our role is not to design a strategy. Our role is to offer support with an existing strategy in the way that we could bring an accountability office complaint as an element of that. Our work is never a silver bullet. With supporting communities to use an accountability office, it is one piece of what's necessarily a struggle that often involves media, sometimes civil disobedience, sometimes political activity, lobbying, any number, shareholder activism, any number of responses using tools that communities have available to be heard and create leverage for change. So what did we achieve in Haiti? This is an example of where information was gathered through our research team with Samer's leadership, along with our community's lawyers, to make sure that the community's own locally led research and what they knew to be true could be translated to a language that was available for the banks and international institutions to be able to comprehend and understand. That was achieved through a multi-part dialogue process through the Inter-American Development Bank's own accountability office. So that's why we were able to be involved in this case, because the Inter-American Development Bank does have an accountability office. It has a dispute resolution function, and professional mediators were provided at no cost to the communities to be able to sit at the table with the government of Haiti, with the Inter-American Development Bank, and hammer out solutions in agreements that have now been reached, and we're over a year into implementation of those agreements, including new land for the farmers who lost land, many of them, as well as a host of other remedies, including agricultural supports, microenterprise support, job support, and a host of other benefits that the community themselves decided were their priorities for the negotiation. So our role continues in this process. We work with communities in what we call through the last mile, which is an acknowledgement that getting an agreement on paper is meaningless for communities. What they need is implementation of those agreements. They need remedy. We also work with compliance investigations, where instead of dispute resolution, communities bring a complaint to an accountability office asking for an audit of whether the institution's policies regarding human rights and the environment, their social safeguard policies, whether they've been followed. Those are transparent public reports, which can then be a tool for change. So in either case, again, on paper, it doesn't matter. It's what happens during the last mile to get to remedy that is where the impact is, and we accompany communities through that process. So moving quickly to from this example from Haiti to the kind of a bigger picture of where we contextualize this work is policy advocacy that Margot here leads. And in that work, we have three basic goals. The first is to take the lessons from the case in Haiti and the thousands like them, including the many that we've read personally, but to make sure that the lessons from those cases are fueling systemic change. So we're not seeing the same case over and over again. We want to make sure we're strengthening the existing accountability offices. There are dozens of them now. The Inter-American Development Bank's one, the World Bank has several, all the multilateral development banks have them, export credit and promotion agencies have them, and there's a separate and somewhat similar system tied to the OECD of what are called national contact points. So it's strengthening the existing accountability offices. And then finally, our third pillar in our policy advocacy program, we don't want to just use the existing system and reinforce that there's accountability in one area. We want any financial flow impacting a community, causing harm, to be accountable. And for us, that means we have to look at a lot of the gaps that exist in private finance in particular, where we have a focus right now on impact investing, causing harm, and needing an accountability system. We're focused on Chinese international finance. And we're also really focused on climate finance, which, because of a shift of money toward climate finance, we're seeing all of the same predictable harm to community if that money is not centered on understanding what the needs are at a local level and working to prevent the same type of harm we see across the board from international investment. So with that, I will turn now, Samara, in the next slide, to our research program, which Samra leads. And just briefly, I'll run through 2 quick points here, which is that we have 2 approaches to this program. We have first a set of tools and other research support to our own work, to our own cases, as I mentioned in Haiti, to make those cases more effective. And Samra will share what those are. And then finally, in November, we launched a major database with all of you as ideal users in mind. And I'm going to let Samra take the mic at this point to share a little bit about his work and what those projects are. So I'll turn it over to Samra now.
Great, thanks, Natalie. I'm super excited to be here with you all today, and thank you for the kind words on that article. I was very thrilled to write it. As Natalie mentioned, the research department has a bit of a wide mandate. We cover a few different things, including kind of direct support work for both ongoing policy initiatives and our ongoing casework. So we were, for example, deeply involved in this Haiti case. We traveled to many of the dialogue sessions. We tried to help with like kind of broader methodologies and information sharing. But we also do our own departmental broader work into the state of understanding accountability in international finance writ large. And in addition to that, which I'm going to get into a little bit, talking about the database that Natalie just mentioned, we also see how we can provide, information, tools, and other resources that help mitigate the power imbalances that we see in a lot of these dialogue processes or a lot of these community complaints around internationally financed projects that may be harming those communities. And we've had like a really amazing opportunity to use all of those different pieces in a lot of different ways, and I'm super excited to share some of them with you today. Although I do want to note that I'm probably just going tip of the iceberg here. There's 1,000 different projects that are spanning in a lot of different directions, but everything that we're doing right now are really focused on, I would say, 2 main core principles. One, which is that no one understands what a community needs or what a community's problems are better than that community themselves, obviously, but transmitting that information through particularly kind of discourses of power can be tricky. So figuring out how to mitigate those underlying imbalances, how to make sure that voices are being amplified, and what resources we can provide to make that process easier are all really big priorities for us. And the second big principle is just that access and transparency have an inherent value, so that when people understand how these systems work, when people have access to seeing where these systems are failing, we can sort of build a shared ecosystem of information and knowledge that everyone can hopefully use to make the entire process of accountability in international finance better. So I would love to, if I can just get out of this presentation, just share a couple of tools with you that we've been working on internally that I think are worth sharing a little bit. The primary one, and one that we built actually in response to some of the community needs that we identified in Haiti, is a surveying project called Swazo. And we basically built this with a problem that we were facing in Haiti around sorry about that. Communicating with a group of almost 4,000 farmers and family members who were displaced by this industrial park, as Natalie mentioned, and as a result of that, have dispersed all over the country. And this is a community that has really low literacy rates, has no access to internet, and doesn't have high smartphone adoption. So reaching these people is a tedious and long process, and one where the leaders of this farmers collective that was formed to file this complaint would have to do a sort of like a web branching door-to-door outreach process of consultation and large community meetings, all of which are really valuable for that community to kind of get a sense of what was happening within it. But when it sort of translated to the dialogue, didn't really produce any sort of actionable information. And so, we had situations where community members were saying, our children can't go to school. As a result of this displacement, we're not able to send our children to school. The response to which was like, oh, Haiti's always rough. Like, who's to say that you ever sent your children to school? This idea that a kind of community-based discourse doesn't fit within these more formal discourses and the kind of parameters that they exist in. And so we started thinking that maybe we could build out a communication system that allowed us to record messages and blast those messages out to communities, and critically a way for those communities to provide feedback in the other direction. And so this sort of developed into the surveying methodology that we called Zwazo, which is the Haitian Creole word for bird. And it's basically just built right on top of the Twilio API. I'm sure some of you will have similar systems that allows us to, a community leader to record a message, ask a question, send that message to a pre-populated list of phone numbers. You know, it'll send 400 or 500 calls at once, and then pull all the answers. You know, people can either press keypad answers or record a message after a beep, and then we like record all of that, upload it, analyze it, and then instead of just saying like we talk, you know, these community leaders can then go to these dialogue sessions, and instead of just saying we talk to the community and they're saying that we can't send our children to school, you can adapt that discourse in a way that kind of carries more weight. So you end up saying like, oh, we surveyed 400 families, and of those 400 families, 375 said X. You know, this number of people were sending their children to school before. Now that number has dropped to this, right? And you have really actionable information that carries a certain weight and allows us to kind of validate concerns from the community and have community folks more directly participate in the broader process. It's a process that we actually found so useful that we've actually made a spin-off project since then, which we call Asfour, which is just the Arabic word for bird. I'm not very creative with my naming, which is a really simplified version of that broader messaging system that, instead of doing kind of multi-part surveys, allows us to do basic either SMS or video or image or WhatsApp or voice messages, blast it out, and then that phone number is also reachable in the other direction. So we've been using this too as a kind of like lower investment or like lower barriers to access communication system, and we've opened this up to all our community partners as well and any other folks that want to use it. So it's super easy to just kind of set up an account and just start sending messages. Obviously you need phone numbers and links to that community ahead of time, otherwise that system doesn't work. But we're actually really happy to say that communities here in the Bay Area have adopted this system to do COVID-related outreach to identify vulnerable communities and the needs that those communities might have. So it's been sending thousands of messages about all kinds of like mutual aid and direct aid efforts. I actually referenced the system in the article that was mentioned earlier. And if anybody needs to use anything like this, you know, like please don't hesitate to reach out. It is open and available and free to anybody. So all of that is just kind of like one little path of the things that we've been doing, which is building out these communication systems. We've also been building out a whole tier of other technology-related mini projects that we find have been relatively helpful. We created, again for the Haiti case, a compensation tracker, which is just a really simple website that allows people to figure out whether they were appropriately compensated through the process of, I think that's through the process of this, their displacement and whatever they were supposed to receive. Like, did they receive the correct amount of money that they were supposed to receive, given, you know, the size of their family, their age, the amount of land they lost, etc. We've done, I don't know, probably a dozen different little projects like that. We've built implementation trackers, and we're actually in the process of building out, it's not public yet, but here's a sneak peek, an online scorecard tracker of how our implementation in Mongolia has been going, which has a little bit of background on it, a sense of like what happened with this group of camel herders who were negatively affected by the construction of the largest, one of the largest copper and gold mines in the world. The achievements based on how that complaint was filed and the agreement that came out of it, but also the challenges that have come from this entire process. A look at, you know, more information about what's been happening, a kind of way to analyze how the commitments are evolving over time, and then a series, like a really deep dive into where the status is on all of the commitments made by the Mongolian government and the International Finance Corporation as it related to this agreement. And of course, again, in the spirit of access and accessibility, since this is a website about agreements in Mongolia, the entire site also, of course, functions entirely in Mongolian. So like if folks have a a browser that works in Mongolian, then this entire site just switches over and the entire thing works equally well in Mongolian. And then the last final thing that I would love to go over, thank you for listening to me kind of spiel about all the interesting things that I love to do with my day, is what Natalie mentioned earlier, which is probably our flagship project, which is this Counsel, what we call the Counsel, which is a database of every complaint any community has ever filed with any of these accountability mechanisms. And so that allows us to kind of be this hub of transparency and information about how this entire system operates. So, you know, for folks who say are interested in issues related to like gender-based violence in Latin America, it's really easy to just pop into this system and get a sense of what communities have been complaining about what, to do a kind of deep dive into every complaint that raises those issues. You kind of just pop in and then pull out whatever information you want to grab from it. And then each individual complaint has really detailed information about the stages that that complaint went through, the issues raised in the complaint, and then links back to all of the original documentation that you might need. So for example, if I wanted to see the original complaint registry page that was filed, at this case with the Accountability Office of the International Finance Corporation, that's there, along with project documentation. So if you wanted to really deep dive into an individual complaint, you can do that. But at the same time, if you want to look at like a kind of broader set of complaints to identify trends or issues related to you know, particular sectors or particular regions or even particular types of financing, like if I wanted to get a better understanding of how energy projects in sub-Saharan Africa are affecting communities who are filing these complaints, it's easy to kind of use a really broad set of filters that we've built into this system, a really broad set of filters, and a way to visualize and understand this complaint data. We're doing some really wild things with this. On top of it, we're kind of aggregating information up so we have a better understanding of what projects have multiple complaints from different communities over longer periods of time. We're trying to identify what clients, like which companies sometimes or which governments are receiving public financing over time that's resulting in multiple community complaints. Right now, remarkably, there's no way to get information like that. If some like giant mining conglomerate, for example, has received billions of dollars in public financing over decades, and most of those projects are resulting in community complaints of harm, that information isn't really centralized anywhere yet. And so it's a pretty big undertaking that we're working on now, as well as information about the accountability offices themselves. We benchmark how all of these institutions' policies compare with one another as a way of identifying who has, you know, kind of good practices and policies and how those policies might be impacting these complaint outcomes. So we have a great comparison feature for how these different mechanisms operate. And we've recently built in the ability to scan and search all project documentation from any of these complaints. So instead of just looking at this information at a kind of high level, and I, you know, like going through an individual mechanism or just looking at the kind of descriptions and names of complaints, we're also in the process, again, a quick sneak peek, of building out this ability to search through all complaint and project documentation, which is going to be a super powerful tool once it's ready. So for example, you know, if I was concerned about how international investment might be leading to instances of child labor, for example, I could search for any complaint documentation at any stage of any process that references child labor. And that allows me to pull out, even if these kind of concerns are a little bit more hidden or harder to access, given that you have to dig through thousands and thousands of documents, I can just pull that information out right here and see like which complaints are raising child labor issues and in which ways. Like it just grabs it immediately from, you know, final reports, from responses from bank management, from the complaints themselves, and then all the associated complaint information is here too if I just wanted to jump over to it. So that's like a really fast breeze through of 1,000 different things that we're doing. But there are a lot more things I could show you, but I think it might be more valuable to probably have a conversation around all of this. I really appreciate the time that you all have given me to show off some of the things that we're doing, and I hope that we could have an interesting conversation about any questions y'all might have or any thoughts. And I think we're thrilled to be part of this community, and thank you for inviting us.
Oh, wonderful, Samer. Thank you so much. That was a great presentation. Yes.
And John, just to put a little exclamation point on it, as I mentioned at the top, you all are the designed super users of this this tool and this set of tools that we had in mind. It's communities and their advocates that we know need support to be able to use these systems. We recognize these systems require some technology, they require some information. We are here to provide that bridge of information to communities. We do that within our own work, but we would like to be able to support this broadly, particularly with this database, to make sure that people have the capacity and know-how to be able to use it and really use it to a good effect to any type of work that you're doing. So
That's
thank you again
wonderful.
for the chance to also learn from all of you.
Great. Let me ask the first question. Have you been interacting with any journalists who've dug into this database and written up stories that got greater attention to some of these injustices?
Samer, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, we've talked to a few, mostly through hooks, like folks who were looking at particular cases and wanted to get a better sense of how the ecosystem relates to those cases. So we've had a number of journalists pop into the system and pull out some really interesting data. We actually have a few different target user groups that we're trying to make sure are using the system, because we feel like there's a sort of intrinsic value for, not only communities and their advocates to be accessing this information, not only journalists or academics and researchers, which also have a really important role to play in understanding the system and suggesting how it can be improved. But we're also really lucky to be engaging directly with both policymakers and individuals within the banks and the accountability mechanisms themselves. So we have a couple dozen users directly within those accountability offices or the banks that house those accountability offices, which I think is a really powerful way for them to see, frankly, information that they can't even access in their own internal systems about the complaints that they're filing,
Right.
to get a better sense of how the whole process is going and how they compare with other folks, and using that as a sort of mechanism for change. So journalists is definitely one of those core groups.
Yeah, I would think.
We're hitting the different pieces for sure.
Good. Well, a little later in this call, we'll be discussing our own media strategy. So hopefully we can help drive a little more traffic from journalists to your site. Anyone else have a question for Natalie or Samer? You can write it in the chat box, or you can just unmute and say it. Any questions?
This is
Hi,
Ann Hendricks Jenkins. I have a question. Thank you so much for that incredible presentation. I'm really looking forward to digging in. Your material seems so responsive to the needs rather than the other way around. So to see the variation in the materials that you have. My question is, as potential super users of your products and your approaches, instead of letting trouble find us, so to speak, are there ways that we can proactively try and find areas where trouble is common, or where there might be things that we would miss if we didn't look for it, patterns that you see in certain places with regards to communities that could use this kind of support?
That is such an excellent question. Samer, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that. And it's something that we think about a lot. And we have some projects down the pipeline where we're trying to connect information on, one of our partner organizations produces a database called the Early Warning System that provides high-level information about new project financing. So to connect that back with this broader complaint database, I think would be super valuable. But I would note a couple of the limitations of the systems that we work in. One, accountability offices are nowhere near as widely accessible as they should be. So they're not, I wouldn't say, necessarily indicative of when a problem is arising, because you also have to have the community get through the hurdle of being able to file a complaint and have that enter the system and things. So at best, what we have here is a database of what's indicative of what might be affecting a community in a particular area. But given that caveat, I do think that at least hopefully that this data is useful to identify, digging in, you can see both how certain sectors of investment are ramping up in particular areas over time, and how those kinds of ramp ups of particular types of investment are coming with commensurate community complaints. So it does show you, for example, that infrastructure projects are booming all over Africa, and as a result, we're seeing all kinds of concerns about violence and displacement and how those relate to particular aspects of those projects. So it's not we're not at the point, I'm sorry to say, where it's like a super intuitive and easy thing to pull out that information, but in these early stages of building out these systems, a really dedicated user can pull out, I think, some very interesting and very actionable information from there. Absolutely.
Thanks, that's really helpful.
Ritu has posted a question on the chat. Has Accountability Council focus on working on projects funded by the US government, such as MCC, USAID, OPIC, etc.?
Yes, is the answer to that question. OPIC was a financer of our communities program cases in both Liberia and Mexico. And back when we were just starting off, I was the lawyer in charge of those cases. So I ran those cases. So I've worked quite a lot on OPIC related investments gone wrong. And then the reason why we don't have any communities program cases related directly to accountability offices at MCC or USAID, because they do not have accountability offices, which is why Margot Day, our policy director's job, is to close accountability gaps, including a big target on the US government, where it's kind of unconscionable that there is financing going out for development without accountability. And Margot, I don't know if you want to say just a moment about where that sits with the DFC and USAID for this very relevant audience.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity to chime in. Again, my name's Margot Day, the Policy Director of Accountability Council. Yeah, just briefly, the OPIC cases are in the Accountability Council that Samer talked through. And as there begin to be cases at the New Development Finance Corporation, so kind of the second stage, or the new, what OPIC has turned into, those will also be in the council as well. So we're watching that, and we're actively engaged in building out the accountability mechanism that technically exists at the DFC right now, but needs a lot of work to be fully up and running. So a very current project of ours now, and would be happy to coordinate with anybody on that and how to feed into that process as they open up their consultations to the public.
Hello, I have a question, John. Can I go ahead?
Yes, please.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much, our two great presenters. These are really great tools, and thank you so much for sharing. Now, land in Africa is life. And this is why many in Africa hold the view that land grabbing should only be compensated by returning the land to the rightful holder. Now, while monetary compensation is a great first step, are there mechanisms to determine what the community really wants or needs as a compensation, and then build pressure to act on this? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's I think the true beauty of these accountability offices is that we have seen a number of communities where there's been a land grab. The remedy that they are seeking is not money for that reason. It is a land, and they are crafting what they want out of a dispute resolution process in recognition that there is no substitute for land they have lost. And so the community in Haiti, that was the primary argument because of that very exact set of dynamics that you mentioned. And because accountability offices are not courts, the types of remedies that can be asked for, the types of remedies that can be crafted, the types of solutions that can be offered, communities can, with the right support and leverage, drive decisions about what they're demanding in terms of what they want, and land can be among those options. So in Haiti, it was not simply a cash transfer they sought. It was, even though you've built a sweatshop on our land, what other land is available that we can receive? And that was achieved through that dispute resolution process, such that these communities, not all of them, this was a complicated negotiation, but many of them who lost land will receive new parcels of land as a result of the agreement. And it's not to say that that's possible in every case, of course, but it is within the realm of possibility for the system as a whole, that this system allows for creative and community power building opportunities for engagement that can deliver land-related remedies.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions for our presenters? I'm Gunjan and I'm stepping in because we were having slight tech issues right now. But yeah, if anyone has any other questions, any observations for our presenters? No? Going once? Going twice? All right, I think thank you for the great presentation, and these new tools. I'm sure as we try and use them and go through them, we will have a series of questions that probably come back to you. Okay, yeah. So yeah, so if Natalie and Samara, if I can request you to in the chat box, just put in a contact email ID where people can reach out to you if they have any questions as they browse through some of this excellent, reports, tools, and articles that you've put together. That would be wonderful, and then we can probably move on.
I'm happy to also just put in one last note here, which is that we have free unlimited access for anyone who's a public interest user on a limited budget. All you have to do is register and request a fee waiver, and we'll grant you access, which is something we forgot to mention earlier and very much should have. So please dive in there, request away, and welcome into the system. So that is very much an important caveat there. Thanks.
Hi, Gunjan, thanks for coming to the rescue. I think, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, okay, good. Okay, any other, I think we have time for one more question. And if not, we'll go to the next thing.
Hi, this is Anne. I'm sorry, I
Hi,
always have lots of questions. Sorry, my camera is acting up. But my one other question is, we have a lot of in-country partners of civil society organizations, and we support the thriving civil society in every country. And so I imagine that there's a lot of accountability type organizations in countries that you coordinate or collaborate with, and wondered from their perspective, is there anything special or any ways that they can interact with your material in addition to perhaps a free registration? If you have any trainings or.
Absolutely. We do in our communities program knowledge sharing workshops and trainings all the time. So please just reach out to me if people are interested in doing a workshop or a training on understanding what the system of tools of accountability offices are and how to engage with them. I also am just remembering I was supposed to mention, and I'm looking at Margot Day here, the inspection panel, which is one of the World Bank's accountability offices, will do a workshop for basically anyone who requests. So it could be an individual, a community, a civil society organization of any size or type. They are standing by waiting to get requests to be able to present on what they do and how they work with communities. In terms of workshops, we've done workshops in different languages. We have a variety of language skills across our staff team. So I encourage people to reach out with requests, and we try to do our best with the capacity that we have, which is of course limited, but trying our best. Thank you for the question.
Great. I see someone's asking about French. I assume French is one of those languages, perhaps?
Yes, we do have French speakers on staff.
All right, way to go. Thanks.
Okay, so thank you very much, Samara and Natalie. That was truly awesome. I really, you've done so much more than I had even imagined, and I think can't wait to dive into some of this work together. We're now going to turn the page. As you know, one of the opportunities thrust upon us by COVID-19 has been to bring together now probably more than 100 organizations to reflect on how to adapt the processes of community mobilization and empowerment during the COVID-19 period. And it comes at a time when lots is going on as well in the movement. So I want to call on Gunjan to share briefly how that's going, and she has a couple of other things to include at the same time. Gunjan?
Thank you, John. Actually, before I dive into the COVID work that we are doing, because we were talking about accountability with the Accountability Council and the World Bank training, let me reverse the order and start with the GPSA first. So there is a global partnership for social accountability at the World Bank. And last November, some of you may have heard that we had started conversations with them when we presented about the movement and the work that we did to the GPSA. We very strongly believe that there are very strong overlaps and synergies between social accountability and community-led development, and that the two should basically be working and talking together instead of operating in silos. So again, John mentioned at the beginning of this call about breaking silos, and we're trying to do that across a number of different fields and issues. So we are organizing a special webinar. The GPSA is actually organizing a special webinar on June 30th at 9 a.m. Eastern time. So, you know, just because there's a lot of people from Africa and Asia who join those webinars and the timing has to suit everyone. That webinar is actually going to talk about the movement, but it's also going to reflect upon the intersectionality between social accountability and community-led development, how the two are actually symbiotic. And, you know, how can we work together? Because a lot of the problems that we are facing now in the wake of COVID-19 are similar, but also there are a lot of similar opportunities that we can work together on. So John has already, I think, circulated today the announcement for that webinar and the details for logging in. We would love to have you participate. We would love to have you explore the intersectionality on the call, but also to ask questions and have this discussion together with the social accountability community, which is going to be there. So that's the GPSA. I'm going to pivot back to the COVID series now. So we've had 3 calls. We started in April as a response to what a number of partners identified as a need, a series of calls focusing specifically on COVID-19. And what do we need to do? How do we adapt community-led development processes to function in a COVID-19 world, in a post-COVID-19 world, and also to prepare ourselves for future crises, because crises do keep coming up in today's world. And so we started by looking at the different barriers that we are facing by identifying solutions. And the 3rd call in the series was held last Wednesday. And what we focused on there was a scenario planning exercise. So we recognize the fact that we have a huge breadth of organizations who work within the movement, from small organizations, community-based local organizations, many of who are part of our call. They come from different countries, and they bring with them very strong community level experiences, but also specific problems and challenges and issues which are happening on the ground. So from that size to huge international INGOs that are working with a number of partner organizations in a number of communities across the world. So we did a scenario planning across 4 such organizations. We went through the exercise to understand what is the process of scenario planning, because many of our partners are not aware of that, and to see if this can be a tool which people can use going forward. All the documents that we use, the resources are all available. In fact, some of them have already been posted. The rest will be posted on the CLD website. So I would encourage anybody who is interested in this to actually look at the website, to go through some of the processes we have followed. And if you have any questions, if you were on those calls or if you were not on these calls and you have any questions about how to apply some of these tools, about the learnings that are coming forward. Because one interesting thing we learned from our partners was that actually they take a lot of what comes out in the COVID-19 calls to their telephone calls and their conversations with not just their own colleagues, but with community leaders. And that for us was really the aha and the wow moment that, we're truly connecting the dots. Our next call will be in July. And for this call, we are actually going to, I see Annette on this call, and she is going to help us actually get a community leader from the ERC. So we are actually going to have a few community voices coming directly and speaking, even as we go into the breakout groups to brainstorm. So you will hear the announcement for the next call very soon. Finally, we decided, based on everybody's, on the demand that was expressed through these calls, a working group has been formed on adapting CLD processes to COVID-19. The terms of reference of the working group are evolving. It has to be created true to the spirit of community-led development. It has to be created by the people who want to be in the working group to see what they wanted to do. That link has also been shared for everyone. And finally, so that's COVID-19. And the third update I have actually is on the collaborative research. And if anyone has any questions around the GPSA, around COVID-19, the work we are doing, please feel free to send them to us. I will later pop my email ID into the chat box. So again, many of you may have heard since last year about the collaborative research that the movement started to understand what is the impact of community-led development. What happens in communities when we apply CLD approaches, and why and how do these changes and impacts happen. We've of course seen it, and now with COVID-19 we are witnessing it firsthand. But a lot of times what donors want is hard evidence, and this was in response to the study that had come out in 2018 now, by 3IE, saying that community-driven development may sound wonderful, it does not deliver on its promises. And we do know that it delivers actually. So we wanted to get together the evidence to show this. We've had 35 people from 23 different partner organizations in the movement working on this research. And the last update we gave was in November, actually, when we presented the research. What's happened between then and now is that we have used the tools that were developed in this research. So we have developed a self-assessment tool for community-led development, which allows organizations to apply the tool and see how community-led are their projects and what more they can do. We have used this tool, we've applied it across the studies. An article on this will soon be circulated to everyone. The scoping groups and the evaluation groups have started reconvening. We had taken a break because of COVID. And so, yeah, in another 2 months' time, you will see the landscape of CLD as it's currently practiced based on the study. So I'll stop there, John. That's the update.
Okay, thank you. Thanks so much, Gunjan. So please do join us on the 30th. We really see linking the multiple groups that are under the Shift the Power umbrella, if I could call it that, together for our collective impact. So I want to take a moment before we dive into other things to talk about raising our profile. We have a communications working group. It so far has very few people in it, and we want to really start to get our material out to a lot more people. Now, what you're seeing here is our graph of our weekly visits on our MCLD.org website. You can see that our best day ever had 229 views. And one of the ways to get more people to know more about what we're doing is to tweet about it, blog about it, link those blogs together, send, include Facebook posts that advertise things that we've put on the website. So there's a lot, particularly if you have people in your organization who are great at social media, who love to post things. We want them in our communications working group. You can go to the MCLD website under the subscribe page and you'll see where to join the communications working group. So this is, I would really like to get, it's sitting at about 1,000 a week, sometimes lower. Like to get that up to maybe 5,000 a week, say, by the end of this year. And there's no reason we can't do that. We have a lot to say. We have, you heard from Natalie, you heard last week from UNICEF, a lot of things to say. So let's get the right people knowing them. We're also going to do a whole project. There's now a lot of us who are in our own group email lists. It's slowly going up. It had been growing by about 10% a month. It slowed down a little bit this month. You can see that of the country, Zambia continues to have the biggest list with 58 people in it. And the working groups themselves, also the research working group, has a very big number of people in it. Communications doesn't, and it should. So we really want to find those communicators who are in an organization to network them together so that we can start to amplify the voice of communities around the world as expressed through our movement. Now I'm going to go back a bunch of pages to our regional coordinators, and they will kick off updates from our chapters around the world. I'd really like to start with Mexico and just hear from anybody who's listening in on the English. How's it going with the Spanish language channel today?
Hi, everyone. So we have this experiment of having people speaking Spanish. So we have some connective issues, and the people who were there, it was just one people today, two people in the call, but they had a shutdown in their computer, so we didn't have the whole call. But we're thinking about how to face the part of sharing the screen and technical glitches that we had. But we're going to share this call with the translation. We want to share this call in Spanish fully, even though they couldn't be online today, but we will do it.
Wonderful. Okay. Well, we can post the Spanish version on the website as well.
Yeah.
Daisy, how is East Africa doing? Are you still on the call, Daisy? Let's see. Maybe Daisy has lost connection. Daisy, are you online?
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Daisy.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi. Okay, so thank you so much. For Uganda specifically, we have we have some easing in the restrictions in the lockdown. So this has enabled most of the CLD partners to start working within the communities, at least tentatively. The volumes of the people reached are not many, but still people are holding meetings with the communities. The sensitization is still going on, but also work with the rest of the work, women empowerment, particular issues focusing on gender-based violence, on child abuse, some of the things which had seemed to build up as a result or during the lockdown. So these are some of the areas which our members are working on, and also continuing with the radio programs and other measures to reach as many people as possible. Excuse me. Okay, excuse me.
Yeah. Okay, Daisy, we're sorry. Are you okay?
So, can I continue a bit?
Yes, please, please.
Okay. Sorry about that. There are also ways of looking at some of the areas. Looking during the lockdown, most of the cases which were coming up were also people, maybe in Uganda especially, people not believing that COVID exists, and also the issues of survival, income generation. So these are the areas where most of our members are also focusing to make sure that the communities understand the message that the COVID is real, but also to start looking for ways in which to engage again.
Okay, thank you, Daisy. Let's head south to Rollins. How is Southern Africa today?
Thank you very much, John, and thank you, everyone. I will speak on behalf of the Zambia chapter, national chapter, and on behalf of the Malawi national chapter, both of which have been active. Zambia has been the busiest chapter, and so we have those two chapters in the Southern Africa region. And what the engine that has driven the excitement and everything in the Zambia chapter is the fact that I think, as you said earlier on at the beginning, John, when all of us pulled out from the villages because of issues of our own safety and the safety of the people that we work with, immediately that allowed a great and powerful community leadership to show up. And Zambia picked up on that and then used that as a case, and they've been engaging with the government to make sure that there is that government policy and action and practice linkage. So the chapter connected with the government community engagement response team, and thereafter they were asked also to comment on the processes that the Ministry of Community Development is actually creating in response to COVID in the country. The chapter has made comments, and they are right now monitoring the progress to see to make sure to what extent those comments are being taken into consideration. But the great thing is to see that active engagement between the national chapter and the government community engagement response team in Zambia. In Malawi, there is a panel that is being organized, and this is going to be a television and radio panel, a live panel that will be organized and will be conducted on a topic of leveraging grassroots structures and local organizations for an effective COVID-19 response on practices and lessons from Malawi. And that is the one that is currently being organized, and there will be representation from the national response team, from the NGO sector, lived examples, the religious leaders, and 5 panelists are being put together for that panel, and it promises to be a great one. And we would like to request each one of you, those that have representation in Malawi and Zambia, please, if you can speak to your contacts and your offices to make sure that they can also be part of the 2 chapters in these 2 countries. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Rollins. Anne, Pascal had another meeting today. I don't know if you want to moderate folks from West Africa. I see a bunch of folks from West Africa on the call, and also I want to chime in for Sierra Leone. Lansana Punde was having internet problems. He was on the call. Oh, you're here.
Okay, great.
Please go ahead. Hello?
Okay, I leave it to Leon. Okay, thank you, John.
Thanks, Pascal. Go ahead. We're not hearing you, Pascal.
Thank you, John. Hi, everyone. I would like to share briefly that in West Africa, we have been very enthusiastic to respond to a call for proposal launched by African Development Bank on civil society against COVID-19 crisis. And Nigeria, Benin, Togo, Liberia went together with the support of Anne to present a concept note to African Development Bank. What we value in that concept note first is our collective impact 3.0. That is to say, to value the authentic engagement, the shared vision, mutually reinforcing each among civil society stakeholders, strategic learning and adaptation, and continuous for change. Those are the main points for the collective impact 3.0. And the other thing we value in that proposal are data, making data available for the response against COVID-19 crisis. And Nigeria has been very, very helpful in this because they have already experiences. Dr. Rebecca is there, and we work together to finalize the concept note, who has been already submitted, as I said. One thing I would like to mention as well is at the national level, we developed a frame for how we as chapter, we think that we could better contribute to the response against COVID-19 responses. First, we share that frame with the Minister of Health, and we are discussing to finalize a joint project. This is a long process, but meanwhile, all the civil society organization involved in the chapter has adopted that frame and is working on the ground according to that frame. As for today, we could report that more than 25 civil society has adopted that frame and is working on it. And I will not come in detail, but that frame includes the guidance provided by the government and the specific guidance developed by civil society organization involved in our chapter. That is two things related to response to COVID-19. One thing I will mention is we are restructuring, we are refining the structure within our chapter, making sure that we are chapter member with clear understanding that we need to contribute to it. So we call those group co-creation group, and we have more than 60 civil society who subscribe to the co-creation group and with a specific term of reference. And the last thing I would like to report on is recently we organized a call with Liberia, where we have an introductory presentation, and Jude could report on this if he's on the call. And Nigeria, Dr. Rebecca is there. The process is going on. for the recognition. And Dr. Rebecca, could you say just one or two things about this if you are in the call, where we are in the process? So that will be, and the Guinea also is on the list of the country very interested to join the MCLD in West Africa. And yes, I had a brief call with a lady direct to me by Dr. John, by John. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Dr.
Okay.
Rebecca, did you want to say a few words?
Yes, we have already on the process, as he said, we publish that we want to establish community-led development in Nigeria. They have already approved the commission, that is Corporate Affairs Commission, approve our name, M, community-led development. They refuse to approve the movement, but at least we have our M, and for us is the movement.
Yeah.
And when they approve, then our lawyers, they wrote so that in Nigeria you have to write and advertise on the national dairies, that is national newspapers too. And it has to be there 28 days. And so today is already 14 days, so remain 14 days. So in these 14 days, we did not hear anything that is negative. So we are on the process with the trustee, the interim committee, and we are on the process of writing the constitution, almost finished. And if they, in 2 weeks' time, if there is nothing, then we will submit, and we will be legally recognized. And we thank all the organizations. We have already formed ourselves into groups working mostly on COVID-19, a thematic group, and then the sustainable development goals. So
Right.
we are all active, and we are great to be part of this, and we are happy.
That's great, Doctor. I see Jude is on the call. Jude, do you want to say anything about Liberia? You have to unmute yourself if you can. Okay, Jude is not able to unmute. And Lansana, did you want to say anything about Sierra Leone? You also would have to hover at the bottom, click on the little mic. Okay, that's not working either. But as we heard from Pascal, these countries are moving forward, as is Guinea. So pretty soon, all of West Africa will be in the movement. This is very exciting. So let me just turn to India for a moment. I know Father Edwin was on. Don't know if he's still there, and Anima is on. Anything anyone wants to say about advancing our agenda for empowering communities in India? I see Anima doesn't have a microphone, and looks like Edwin has lost his connection. So anyway, we will get news from Asia. Anyone else? Any more updates from any of our chapters? I don't know if we have anyone on from Europe today, although we had a very good presentation by our member Constellation, and it was just an excellent walkthrough of their modalities for community-led development. And I've asked permission if we can share their video, and if we can, It was hosted by the Taos Institute, so they own the video, but if we can share it, we will. They have a wonderful approach and really go very deep into the philosophy of community empowerment. With that, yes, please go ahead. Who's that?
Sorry to interrupt, it's Ann again. I just wanted to say I did attend a meeting a week or so ago of the Netherlands chapter of the movement. And in their chapter, they're focusing on the intersectionality of human-centered design and community-led development. So it's been really interesting if anyone's interested in those, that intersectionality. It's been a great conversation.
Wonderful, Ann, thank you. And they also did a great blog post. There's a fellow in the Netherlands doing a whole series of blog posts, sorry, not blog posts, podcasts on these issues, on shifting the power. And so I'll be posting those podcasts for us to listen to on the website. Also, I'll share a link. Duncan Green from Oxfam, very famous commentator in development, did an interview with the new head of Oxfam GB on the future of INGOs. And as Ann pointed to earlier, the possibility of really shifting power from the INGOs to the local civil society actors is something that they're taking super seriously. And I'll share the link to his podcast because it was an excellent discussion of this subject that's so dear to our hearts in the movement for community-led development. Okay, we have 7 more minutes that are possible. If there's any other business to share, if not, I will return those minutes to you for the rest of your day. Any final questions or comments going once?
No, John, I just wanted to share a little quick update from the Mexican chapter. So we have a lot of fronts open right now. We have 2 webinars this week and 2 webinars the next one. And we're discussing around human rights and local development with some allies. And we're also pushing the community-led perspective into the UNDP, with the UNDP here in Mexico and with the whole system of United Nations. So that's something that we're focusing on influencing with those groups. And next week we're going to we're also starting a conversation with FAO. So and next week we're going to have 2 webinars from the movement. One is based in the peace building construction perspective, and also the other one is we're going to have a conversation with some organizations from the movement for discussing what have we learned from communities during this process of COVID. So we want to have their perspectives, and we're also we're going to have some knowledge pieces around this to gather evidence to understand how it's going with CLD actions here in Mexico during these times.
Wonderful, wonderful, Diana, thank you. Okay then, well, there being no further business, I want to thank you all so much for all that you're doing. Whether it was represented or not represented on this particular call. And just this is such a unique opportunity in history. Let's seize every opening we can to fight for a more just, inclusive, and peaceful world together. So thank you all, and I'll be talking to you next month, if not before. Bye for now, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Great to see you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.